Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to Meet Omega. I think this is maybe the 7th iteration of this interview and class that we've done. For anyone who's watching who does not know me, my name is Kayla Sidney, and I'm the Market Center Administrator here at Keller Williams Bluegrass. And I am with Eric Forney out of Indianapolis. And Eric, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background? First, let's hit on what you closed out in 2021. Or 2020.
Yeah. So we were basically right at 2 million in GCI. Any given time, we're 275, 290 or so closings, and somewhere in that 65 to 70 million production range usually.
Okay. So how long have you been in real estate?
So I started full-time in 2015. I think I got asked to no longer be an employee of Sherwin-Williams in September of 2015. And that was what started my full-time career in real estate. I thought I would flip houses in 09. And so you might imagine that went really, really well. It was 09 and I didn't know anything about construction. So I started in real estate investing in 09 and then full-time in 15. Okay. And started building a team in midway through 2017 or so, roughly.
So what influenced your decision to get into real estate, and did you know that you were going to build out a team?
I didn't know anything about teams, and I had no intention of getting into real estate. Somehow I just ended up here. And so when I was at Sherwin-Williams, a lot of my customers were obviously painters or were contractors. So they would flip houses, and what I was finding was that they, some of them didn't have GEDs, and they would make my annual salary in 90 days. And being an arrogant 25-year-old, I just assumed that I could do that too. And so I used the $8,000 tax credit to buy my first house with the intent to flip it. It flopped. I was unimpressed with my real estate agent, who actually now is with the company and oddly enough, looking back, I was the problem as the client. Not that anyone's ever had a challenging client before, but I was unimpressed with the work that real estate agents did at the time. And so I thought, you know what, I'll just cut the agent out and get my license so that I can just do this by myself. I'll flip 4 houses and never think about paint ever again. And so maybe that makes me a control freak, which is probably partly why I had success to start with, at least.
So have you thought about paint again?
Very little, other than painting my house recently. I don't think too much though.
All right. Well, so how long were you an independent agent before you started a team? I think you said 2 years, but let's get into that process a little bit.
Yeah. So when I started, dual career. So I worked a full-time job and then sold in the evening or weekends or times that I probably should have been doing my full-time job. And then when I was asked to no longer be an employee, then I worked for myself as an individual agent for 2 years and then built a team. And so the reason to start a team for me was because I was basically out of bandwidth. There was no additional time at that point that I could get and still grow my transaction count. So at 128 closings as an individual agent in 2016, and realized that there was no time left to have any semblance of a life. Not that I had one or have one now, but at that point especially, I was maxed out. And so I started the team really out of necessity. So, and that's why I joined KW too, was because I had no clue what I was doing. The most I could learn was from YouTube.
So when you say you did 128 transactions, is that fully you? Did you have a transaction coordinator?
Yeah, I did. Yep. So I had a transaction coordinator, and I hired a guy to be my assistant because I watched Tom Ferry clips on YouTube, so I was really well educated, and so I hired a guy because that's what they tell you to do. So I hired an assistant, and I did 0 minutes of career visioning and 0 minutes of interviewing. And so he showed up one day and was like, "Okay, cool, I got my license, I'm ready to start." I didn't realize I'd made him a job offer, but he showed up at my house to work. And so he had no qualifications other than a driver's license and a real estate license. And so he drove my car while I worked in the passenger seat for probably the first year. And oddly enough, that worked really well. So I had Grant who would drive and run errands, and a transaction coordinator until 2017.
Okay. So how many closings did you have probably before you started utilizing the transaction coordinator?
Probably somewhere in the realm of like 65 a year, maybe 60 a year or something in that range.
So
but you can defer so much to here's the hack for efficiency is make everyone else do your work. And so structure your offer to where you're owning the lesser burden of the activity when you write your offer. So like as a buyer's agent, I'm not going to order the warranty, or I'm not going to order the title work. I'm not going to do a number of different things that I would do if I had the bandwidth and staff. I look at it like, how do I shave off any margin of time or work as an agent so that I can help more people? Because that was my problem, was a bandwidth issue where I probably could have done 150, 200 transactions as an individual if there were enough hours in the day to be able to actually meet the demand. And the reality was I had shaved off about everything. I mean, I wasn't even willing to go to the bank to open a bank account. And so I had $192,000 worth of checks in the top left drawer of my desk. And you'll appreciate this. I cashed them all at one time, and Marcus Center was really thrilled about it with no warning. And so needless to say, that created an operating account problem. However, that's just how focused I was on remargining time as an individual.
So, okay, so you went into good detail there. So obviously it gave you a lot of your time back, and you quickly expanded. So what models and systems were you using when you started expanding and growing your business out through leverage?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I don't know. I've not seen this model in the MREA, but it's probably like throw shit against the wall model, because truly, like at the time, I'll donate. At the time.
For anyone who doesn't know, when you're in KW leadership, there's a policy that if you curse, you have to donate to KW Cares. So when we have regional meetings, we're held accountable to that. He knew right away. I was going to say $25.
So, you know, that's really the reason why I came to KW, because I didn't know how to. When I joined, I had closed 76 transactions that year. And didn't know how to do more. And so at the time, I really didn't have a model that I followed. It was, or else I wouldn't have made that hire. So there was no model other than understanding that my goal in sales, regardless of what industry or what sales category you're operating from, your job is to meet people. And so we want to make the job really complicated of being a real estate agent, and it's just not. Honestly, it's just not. If it was, I wouldn't be able to be good at it. And I say that because there's the ability to be distracted with everything. And then there's the actual job at hand, which is meeting people to help them solve a problem. And so when you adopt the model that says my job is just to find someone who needs help every day, it becomes really simple to actually identify that person when you see them.
So you did not start your career at KW?
No, I did not. So I was at oddly enough, the guy who I hired, who I said I was unimpressed with as a real estate agent, was my managing broker. When I first got my license, it was he and I only. And then I worked for another independent at the time right after that, and then went to KW.
So did the MREA play a role in you coming over to KW?
It did not, only because I don't know how to read, but I listened really well. So I listened to the book afterwards, and that was really pivotal in me making better hires.
Sure.
So it wasn't necessarily vital for me as an individual agent to get to 80 transactions. It was critical to understand how to hire better, and then how to identify talent more effectively. So to break through a ceiling, I had to adopt the MRE models. But the what was probably most influential for me was going to Mega Camp, because at the time it's my second year in the business. I've sold 76 houses, and I assume that I have some clue as to like how to generate business as a byproduct of that. So I had gotten a little probably arrogant and was quickly humbled going to Mega Camp, because I remember walking in, and on stage is Brian Gubernick, Adam Hergenrother, Ben Kinney, and Jason Abrams. They're on a panel, and I don't understand what 3 or 4 of them say. And they're all at least like 5 to 10x my production level at the time. And so what I realized was that I actually knew nothing. And that was probably the biggest like eye-opening moment for me about why I needed to be a part of KW, was because everything that I thought I knew about real estate really was nothing at all, especially when it came to business building.
Okay, so one of the things that I always say is that I believe the organizational model in the MRE is probably the most underappreciated, underutilized, and arguably one of the most important, if not the most important. I think you have to start with the economic foundation, but we definitely have to build out the organizational model. So let's talk about why that was.
I thought you would say budget models and CA, but that's okay.
That's why I said technically.
Okay. It's definitely the most boring model.
Let's just talk about why you see so much value in that process, in the hire process.
50% of marriages end in divorce. And so I guess my thought around that is if 50% of people can't date and stay married, why would we think that hiring would have any success? And so if we have no model to keep marriages together, we probably would fail miserably at keeping business relationships together without a model. And so the organizational model and really the career visioning model ends up being the effective way of trying to have a better success rate than marriage. And without that, we would see these massive levels of turnover, because the reality is that everyone presents themselves differently in one interview. And so differentiating between thoroughbreds and jackasses is really difficult without the career visioning model.
So I think this is one of the most important things we can touch on. And if anybody hears anything today, someone who has reached your level of success, how do you stay committed to following that process from beginning to end? Because, when you're a top agent and you're getting pinched, you're getting squeezed, you like to shave off time-consuming parts of the hiring process. So how do you stay committed to that as somebody who's a top agent, busy?
I think you have to actually care about people. And I know that sounds silly, but you have to actually want to know more than what you see on the surface when you're hiring. Like I have to care enough about you to want to know where did you start from? What motivates you? What struggles did you go through? Are there patterns that occur throughout your life that you're likely to gravitate back towards? I have to be genuinely interested in knowing that information in order to be willing to take the time and set it aside, to not go on appointments, to not worry about inspections, to not be distracted. I have to care enough about the person that I'm meeting with to be interested in knowing about them in order to be committed to the model, because it does take time. But the reality is, like, all I'm looking for is a pattern. It's like, does your audio match your video? And so we had a fantastically talented team at one point in time. Not that we don't now, but to paint a picture, when I started building the team, we had an operations director who is world class, transaction coordinator who's fantastic and still with us. We hired a sales director, went all the way through the process. And I remember there was one pattern that stood out to me. I asked a question. We were on 4 interviews, 4 separate times. 3 of the times she did not wear a wedding ring. One time she did. And that day I asked the question of ranking life priorities through like Tony Robbins' 6 models of like human needs, and asked the question about, where would you rank these human needs that everyone has as key motivators? And that day, love and relationship was her #1 answer. And what I realized was that wasn't in alignment with the last 3 times that there was not a wedding ring on the first 3 interviews. And I should have caught that, because it ended up being an issue with some HR issues within the company from a direct reporting perspective. And at that point in time, I overlooked what I knew to be an audio and video mismatch. And so without digging deeper into that and without identifying patterns in the process, it's a lot easier to be fooled by what you want to hear and what you want to believe than what reality is.
I think that the process, it can be extremely time consuming and daunting and overwhelming, but ultimately, yes, that's what we're seeking out, is the opportunity for someone to tell us that they're the wrong person.
Yeah. And it's honestly like things are only ever overwhelming and daunting when you think they are. So typically it's in our mind. And in this case, when we think about career visioning, it's honestly no different than going on a listing appointment 4 times. Because you realistically should be going on a listing presentation and asking needs analysis-based questions to uncover the consumer's motivation, their fears, the problems that need to be solved, what their positive future looks like, what their negative present is. It's just actually caring about uncovering beyond the facade of someone else to go through that. As an agent, it's just 4 listing appointments or multiple listing appointments in a row, which should just be second nature for any other real estate.
So do you consider yourself a master of that process?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I mean, I'll share my numbers if you want to talk about not successes. I kind of pride myself on being authentic, by the way, and saying things that I maybe shouldn't. But I want to paint a realistic picture, because it would be easy for you to hear that I sold a lot of houses my second year and my third year, and then we were the #1 team in the region the first year we started the team, and then just assume that everything works out. And the reality is that's just not true. In fact, of the last 22 hires, I think 16 are no longer with me. And I went through career vision on every single one of them, by the way.
How did you know it was time to get out of business with those people?
Sometimes they choose.
Sure.
But, I don't know that it's any oversimplification would be unfair to tell you that there's a glaring, obvious way to look at it. We've had some challenges that just from life perspective, like everyone has. We had a listing coordinator who came home and found her husband dead on the couch. We had an operations director whose one-year-old died on New Year's Day. We had six people get pregnant. We've had some interesting life events that have played into retention, but we've also had those that just didn't work because either we weren't the right company for them, or real estate maybe wasn't the right career for them. The biggest and fastest way for me to know to get out of business with someone is whether they're a victim. Okay. Ownership and commitment is, I'm a sucker for those 2 things. If you'll accept ownership of your own life and your own actions and your commitment, then I'll probably keep you forever.
Okay, I like that.
Because the reality is anyone who's willing to objectively own their role in reality is almost always willing to adapt and try to get better tomorrow.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's the first time I've actually ever heard somebody put it in those terms. So I think that's really interesting. How do you set goals for yourself?
That's kind of actually a challenge for me. So there's probably what I did at one point in time and what I do now. So at one point in time in my career, I operated from a deficit thinking perspective, in that it was about validating my own worth. And it was about like, can I achieve this in order to become that person prove it to myself, be a top agent. It was all about like the deficit thinking of competitiveness and am I worth it or can I do it? That's a really good motivator, by the way.
Sure.
Like Michael Jordan made bulletin board material all the time of that deficit style thinking. And that was enough to drive him to the Hall of Fame. In fact, even during his Hall of Fame speech, he talked about getting cut from his high school team, right? And so that works really, really well. And so that was how I set goals originally, was basically on recognition. Whereas now for me, goals are more on experience, or on like the ability to actually help other people, and the ability to create an impact that I don't have to be the person who gets the credit for. In fact, just last week, we've been getting a lot of questions about this. Like just last week, we partnered with Adam Hergenrother on expansion and doing some expansion growth for the company, and merging in 3 other teams in Indianapolis. And so, we're looking at 600 units in projected production for 2022. And, a lot of people have said to me, like, why would you do that? And the reality of it is I don't need credit for it anymore. And so then it's a matter of, what do I want to do? Do I want to go do cool shit with cool people? Or do I want to be the guy who gets all the recognition for it? And so that change is now to want to do cool things.
Yeah. So I guess that's very high level thinking. So as a team leader, a rainmaker, how do you communicate that and infuse your people with that same enthusiasm?
Yeah, good luck. I failed at that last week. So maybe you guys could let me know if you've got any ideas. So how do you infuse the idea of? I mean,
the idea is that eventually you want to work your people up to your thinking, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So what's your approach?
So as a leader, you're always trying to multiply your time, and that means as many group thought activities that you can participate in, the better. So the goal being that if I can get a group of team members together at one time to go through a thought model, or to bring me a problem to solve, and then work through how I would solve that problem, or how I would see something objectively that they don't see, allows the multiplication concept to where everyone can simultaneously observe my thought model, so that they can apply it in their business. So ways that we actually tactically do that on a regular basis. We have a Monday meeting in which we follow roughly the same format, and that's celebrating someone who is in culture. We actually do a critical thinking exercise as a group, because I think real estate and sales is problem solving.
Can you give us an example?
Yep. So they'll be dumb, like with black and white and red all over. I'm oversimplifying that, but that's the type of critical thinking group exercise we'll do to try to start the conversation. Is find a riddle, find a problem to solve, a murder mystery, whatever. And then we'll review numbers for the week, review listings that are coming up this coming week. That way everyone knows when you get sign calls, how to be quasi-prepared to take the sign call. We'll then listen to recorded calls, lead gen calls as a group. And we'll go through what went well on the call and where's their opportunity. And the biggest value, I think, in that particular instance is I don't have to go through and listen to everyone's calls. I used to do that. I would pick them randomly and listen to them and send them feedback and notes on it that goes, hey, when you said cheaper, or when you said less expensive, do you think they heard cheaper? Or ask questions that would challenge their thought model or their language pattern. We get to do that now as a group. And so they get to hear my perspective on someone's call and someone's lead conversion. And then they also have to think about it first as a team, because I realize that as a leader, if I go first and share my perspective, I've diminished everyone else's perspective. So if it's, hey, what did Michael do really well in his call, then everyone shares what they heard that went well on the call, and then I might contribute what I think Michael did really well.
How does that impact the culture on your team?
Well, hopefully it impacts transparency and vulnerability, right? And it depersonalizes the fact that we all sound on the phone, and that we all get rejected, and that the faster that we're willing to accept the fact that we all get rejected, the better. It also impacts the culture because then you're able to multiply your thought model to everyone in the organization as effectively as possible, so that you're not exclusively the problem solver, because that's what unfortunately happens. What you would understand as an MCA, when you're a problem solver, everyone brings you their problems. And so that's one of the challenges of leadership. It's also why you oftentimes end up in the position. And so if you can teach everyone else how to preempt their problems or have them be prevented entirely, the culture of the company is one that is able to be more focused on production and less focused on problems.
So when you're making the lead gen calls, you're making calls, what are your other methods of lead generation that you have them? Well, first of all, how many agents do you have on your team right now? Agents.
Yeah. So we have 4 or 5. Let me think. There's 5 desks in there. We have 5 agents in production currently. And then we have agents in training. So we have a 3-year long training program. The first 12 months are more intense than the second 2 years. But we have 4 agents in our 12-month training program in their first 12 months currently.
Okay, what does that look like?
So, so it is basically they have a portion of their day that is spent on lead generation, and that's supposed to be 5 hours a day for them. So they're calling for sale items, expired, old leads, circle prospecting, anything the agents need that's, I don't know, right now inventory is super easy to find, right? So it might be, hey, I have a buyer who wants to live in this specific neighborhood or these 2 neighborhoods. Can you see what you can generate from that? And maybe they're door knocking. I've personally not been a door knocking fan. However, we are getting listings via door knocking with the agents in that fire program doing door knocking. So they've got lead gen, and then they have education related objectives that they have to get through. So it's 12 months of curriculum to go through, 12 books, presentations to make, quizzes, those things.
And are they all already licensed, or do they work their way up to that?
Yeah, so they have to be licensed within 60 days.
Okay, so you're sort of using them as like ISA, OSA, while they're learning the foundational blocks.
Yeah, the best example would be like what a resident would look like in medicine.
Okay.
Where you're working long days, long hours, shadowing agents, getting mentorship from the doctor, but you're also performing some patient care and some procedures under the supervision and responsibility of the agent.
We don't need to get
I'm not saying that you should go do this either, by the way. It's a undertaking that is of a large proportion. So,
I've never heard of it before, and I think it's really interesting. So I don't want to get too into it because, especially with me asking the questions, I could go on for hours. But would you be willing to share what the pay structure looks like for that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Because I think, that's incredible. Essentially, you're creating your own productivity coaching program inside your own team. But you have to connect the dots between action and making money before they get out there. So I'd be really interested to hear how you set that up. I'm sure that.
Yeah. So we looked at it as a 3-year contract and said, okay, what do we expect an agent would do in their first 3 years with the team? What would it be worth to actually create a program that would be time intensive and labor intensive? What would what would we have to profit from that in order to make it worth it at all? What results would we want to see that would be different from this route versus the other onboarding and training routes we've gone in the past? And we traditionally only ever brought on new agents or agents who are underperforming. So we're typically like the Humane Society for realtors. And so we're the last stop for a kill shelter. And you should probably get a part-time job if it's not working with us. And so we looked at it and said, okay, what results do we get historically? And then what results do we want in order to increase the time and attention that we put on it, and then work backwards. So what we currently have is a $2,000 a month model where they get paid for the first 12 months on the $2,000 a month model, and then $500 at closing. And their first 9 closings have to be, they'll get compensated on their first 9 closings that are set for their mentor. So if they're generating leads and setting appointments for the lead agent, they get compensated $500 at closing for the appointments they set for the mentor. And then their next 12 appointments, so their next 12 closings, they are doing their own pin to close and listing coordination on it, so that they have a level of respect and understanding for the operations team, who actually are the real ones who have the difficult job. Hey, good luck out there. He ran away just when he learned that the operations team's actually the ones adding value. So yeah, they do their own TC work on the next 9, and then 2 a year, 2 a month for the next 2 years, and that's on a grant. So it's not a salary. It's a grant that gets forgiven after. Basically, it's tearing down the forgiveness of the grant, so that we as a company can use it as like on accounts receivable. We can book it differently than salary. Plus, if they sell nothing or if it doesn't pan out, they owe the money back. So essentially, it's real estate scholarship.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I've never heard it, and that's incredible. And I can see. So I assume that the $2,000 a month comes from the operational side of your splits, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I know actually, so it does not actually. So it's 5% deduction for the agents on the agent side of the commission for any appointments and closings that occur from the mentee.
Oh, okay. Where do you get the majority of your business lead gen methods? Obviously you're in a different place now in your business than you were when you got started. How did you sort of build up?
So it started as shotgun, really, from a marketing and lead source perspective originally, because it was anywhere and everywhere you can get your name out. So it's like, okay, put out 25 open house signs for every open house, and maybe someone will get used to seeing your signs. For $140 a month, put your face on a grocery cart, or anything and everything that I try to do to create some brand awareness and make the phone ring. And so at that time, like Zillow, I just started I started by spending $350 a month with Zillow. And, I remember that was my car payment, and selling paint. I didn't have the extra money for a second car payment. If I did, I wouldn't have driven a Chrysler 300. And so I was committed, though, to taking on that $350 a month. After 6 months, I had lost $200. I had one closing that I cut my commission on. It was like $1,800 was my commission check. So I lost $200 on my first 6 months of Zillow spend. But what I knew is that my activities were greater month 6 than month 1. And so it was merely a matter of time that as I kept stacking a pipeline, sooner or later, something comes out the bottom if I keep nurturing it. And so I doubled down, and I think I went to $1,200 a month, which was my mortgage at the time. And I definitely couldn't do a second mortgage, or I wouldn't have lived in that house. And so sooner or later, it got to a point where we were significantly outperforming, or I was significantly out earning what I was spending on Zillow advertising at the time. I think when we looked last year, we probably brought in, I don't know, we typically bring in somewhere between $400 and $550 and GCI annually on our Zillow advertising. And it's costly, and it can be costly when I do dumb things with it too, or if I don't like hold it as accountable, or the agents as accountable as we should. We got really aggressive with our spend last year because I thought that the market would go down. I didn't expect at all. I don't think any of us expected the market would get better during the pandemic, because that makes a lot of sense. And so we actually doubled our spend. We went up to like 24,000 a month last year in Zillow advertising spend, which is stupid. I don't recommend that. However, I was used to making $40,000, and as an individual agent, I think I made $808,000 my last year as an individual, and I was used to making 40. And so I was living within my means, and so we had capital on hand to be able to take risks. And we took a risk that our biggest competitor had no solubility and no real profit in their business. And so what my hope was that as the market contracted, so too would their profit and their ability to feed their agents. And so what I wanted to do was run his bill up, see if we could run him out of business. And their production is about 25% of where it was last year. So I don't know if that's a byproduct of me wasting money or not, but the market didn't pan out. The market didn't pan out. Panned out much better than what we anticipated. But the Zillow piece didn't necessarily pan out like we thought. We get a portion of it from client events.
Okay. So how you mentioned you have the Zillow spend, and then you have the agents. So what does your accountability look like on those calls? Because you're wanting to earn on those calls. Yes. Yes.
It's in varying degrees. There are times in which I've been able to be highly accountable, and then times that I hope I'm less accountable. It really depends on bandwidth and based on system. What I found is to be successful with bandwidth oftentimes is just spot checking on things, and then asking about questions, or asking about people or conversations, so that there is at least the illusion.
So you don't have like a minimum conversion rate or anything like that?
We don't. I don't pretend. Fair is a dirty word in my world, and so we don't distribute them fairly, the leads fairly, nor will we pretend that we will. There are 9 routing rules currently, and I do play favorites because profit matters most. And so whomever is the most committed and most profitable with their conversion is typically the one who get the best opportunities inside of our routing.
Can you elaborate on your routing?
Yeah, so it's typically based on location and price for the hierarchy. So agents who commit or who convert the best above, say, 450 are typically the first tier that the screen through to get routed to the. So like, okay, I have 3 agents. Let's say right now it's Danielle and Ashley and Tom are converting best. Therefore, they get they'll get calls at the same time. They'll get calls above 350K for any lead that comes in above 450. Their phone rings simultaneously. And then somebody's on 150 and under. And that's usually because you need some help. And when you give your highest producers the 150 or 100 leads, they get bogged down with leads that don't convert as well or pay as well. So you end up using it's like you put a governor on your Derby winning horse. It would make no sense to slow them down with lower payout races. So I want our best producers to have the most expensive leads and the highest probability of generating. And if they're on vacation or checked out or going through a breakup, that's not my problem. I care about you and I want to help you through that. Business doesn't get to suffer because your life is going to suffer. And that's not heartless, by the way. I realize saying that sounds heartless. I love my people to death, like absolutely. I love my people to death, like absolutely. But I also have a requirement in business to monitor the profitability and the conversion of the company for my own companies to have something to say.
How important is social media in your business? And lead generating?
I have not been on social media. We actually social media has been important for everyone in the company, and myself included. For whatever reason, I've kind of just fallen in love with logging into Facebook and Instagram and social media. So thankfully, Tyler and Kate helped with that big time. So we do a podcast every Saturday. And it's every Friday. And so a lot of times we'll put clips and podcasts up, full episode, of course, on YouTube. That helps with 1, Google rankings, 2, brand building and awareness. Because my job now really is agent influence. It's really not customer attraction anymore. But our agents do generate a lot of business by posting about their days inside of social media, whatever platform they use. They do get a lot of referral business, a lot of sphere business from it.
Okay.
I don't as much anymore because I don't know the last time I posted about a house, unfortunately, other than maybe my own, which is a disaster. You did. Remodeling in a pandemic, really freaking good idea.
So you talked about your brand. How would you describe your brand? And do you have a company mission statement?
It's interesting because, having said that we just worked on a merger and acquisition a week ago, it's hard to say that we have a mission statement and that is like independent of the Her Group at this point. However, we do have a mission statement as a company. And as far as brand goes, when I think about brand is ideally authenticity. Like you shouldn't actually have to create the brand. Your brand should be you. And when you are authentically you attract people who are authentically attracted to you. If not, there wouldn't be Gen Con every year in Indianapolis, right? Because who wants to dress up like characters and go with 20,000 other people to a conference? See, thank you, right? So there are 20,000 other people just like you who would go to a conference, which means when you're thinking about building your brand, you build it authentically. So 1, you can show up authentically as yourself everywhere you ever go, and that people that are attracted to your brand follow and want to be a part of it. Then you don't have to re-enroll them every day on your brand and on your mission. And so, I think about the fact that everyone widely regards that Abraham Lincoln was one of the greatest presidents. And yet the reality is that he started the Civil War. And so 50% of the country hated him, 50% of the country thought that his mission statement was fantastic and they should follow him into war. And the reality is if Abraham Lincoln could only get 50% of the people to follow his mission and to buy into his belief system and his brand, then why the hell would more than 50% of people like my brand and my mission? So if I try to be anything other than authentic, it's going to be really hard and taxing for me to keep that up. every day, day after day, to not be myself and to authentically lead people. Because I'm gonna have to pull everyone else behind the boat, and that sounds terrible.
Okay.
And so the brand shouldn't be this, like, your brand should have clarity, but it shouldn't be something that's contrived.
Can you go into detail about how you personally found clarity?
Yeah, or I guess if I were gonna like coach someone on this, what I would say is that I would look at things that are like, what is uniquely you? When someone describes you, what do people continue to describe you as? What are some of the words and phrases that show up time after time when people think about you or talk about you? In fact, we just went through an exercise last week in Vermont where it was basically, there was 25 of us in a group for Project U, where everyone in the group said, like, Michael is, and then they wrote down their 5 to 10 things that come to mind when they think about Michael, and then shared their findings with Michael. And what was interesting was how similar everyone in the group's viewpoint and perspective and about what Michael's brand was. It was really consistent that everyone said roughly the same thing about each person, despite not collaborating on any of it. And so each person shows up authentically as themselves, ideally, the same way every day. And most people would describe them as something, and that should be their brand.
Do you think empowering people to be more authentic helps make them more productive?
It should. Otherwise you have to live a lie, and that's pretty taxing, right? It's to show up more committed to your identity than to reality. And lugging that around is something that one means that you have to think always about playing that chess game of how you show up for everyone else. And so, I'll ask people the question of when we think about whether we're being authentic and whether we're showing up in brand, is, can you control who looks up to you? Can you control what they see? And the answer to both of those is no. And so if you're anything other than authentic, you're merely living the lie that somehow you can control what people see when they see you and who chooses to look at you. And so it's incredibly time consuming to no avail to be anything other than authentic.
So how does that play into managing people?
Probably, I think it could go good and bad. If you look at Gary Keller, let's use Gary as the example of this. Gary is pretty authentic with Gary. Now, I've been in different settings with Gary, in which his message will change to some degree based on the room, but for the most part, he's authentic. And so he may say things in Mastermind that he wouldn't say on stage at Mega Camp. And he may say things in a room full of OPs that he wouldn't say at Family Reunion. But his authenticity still remains the exact same. And so because he shows up authentically predictable, it actually gives everyone else in the room the ability to depend on that leader more, because they're predictably authentic. They're predictably themselves all the time, instead of trying to adapt the way they approach, in that example, 4 different audiences. The only thing that changes is the words and the message, because not everyone's ready to hear the message that you might say in a room of OPs or a room of Mastermind that you would say from the stage of Mega Camp. Not everyone is going to be able to receive your message, but it doesn't mean that you change your authenticity.
I'm going to change gears on you a little bit.
Okay.
So how do you maintain work and life balance?
You don't. Throw it away. Quit. Seriously. Stop. Stop it. Honestly, like, get rid of this idea of work-life balance. It's silly. Like, there is no such thing as work-life balance. It's called life. So what I do is have life, and I live the life that I want to live, and I don't have guilt or shame around that. Which means if I want to work 12 hours today, I'm going to work 12 hours today. If I want to work 4, I'll work 4. If I like, there are some mornings that I'll stay home with my 3-year-old until I've decided that we've hung out for enough time together, and I don't have guilt around that because I also realize that there are nights that I'll stay at the office until 9 o'clock. And I don't have guilt around that either. And that's because I'm not trying to believe that there's somehow is this like fictitious ability to switch in and out of different life buckets. The reality is that like I can't just like pick up a book and read all of the chapters simultaneously. I have to read one chapter at a time. And so maybe right now life balance for me is working long days. But it doesn't mean that 30 years from now that's going to be what I choose for life balance. I'm probably going to sit around and do nothing, but I don't have guilt around how I choose to spend my time because I've already spent it. So it's gone. Feeling bad about it or not being in balance doesn't change that. And so the way that it works for us is that we have conversations around what I need. And the same thing works for Lauren. She has conversations around what she needs, either from me or from work or from whomever in life. And then there's no guilt around having that conversation. I'm not saying it's always fun, because I have a wife and not every conversation is fun, despite the fact that she is. No, just kidding. She's amazing. But we have open dialogue around the fact that, hey, I'm going to be out of town today and tomorrow, which means I'm not going to be able to pick Hudson up from daycare, or I'm not going to see him in the morning. So that means, what do you need in advance to help me do what I need to do or want to do? Because the reality is, I love to work. I do. If I go on vacation, I would work. Like, I think that we're all here to create something. And just so happens that like we all choose to create in our own way. We're here to make an impact on people and to create community and to contribute. If we don't do that with work, what do we do that with? Someone can choose to do it with their family. They can choose to do it by coaching a soccer team. They can choose to do it a lot of different ways. It's just that I choose to contribute via work because I enjoy it.
So I like that approach a lot. And I guess I would ask, how do you communicate? Just because I think you're exactly right as far as like you have life, but sometimes you have to put up boundaries because you're like, right now I want to do this thing. So how do you communicate those boundaries with people and sort of get them to understand your perspective?
For the most part, I only have to communicate those things at home. And I guess if I'm in a relationship that I can't communicate those things, then the first thing I need to do is hire someone to help me communicate those things. Which certainly is something we've all done. I hope, at least something I've done. I know we've talked about it everywhere I go. I seem to talk about the value of therapy and how it's probably been the best thing I've done for 10 years. Even when I didn't know how to communicate 10 years ago, and or was unwilling to do that. And so, for us, it's been learning to actually be willing to communicate boundaries and to not have any fear around the boundary about whatever the repercussions or expectations may be of that. And so, my current relationship, I went into the relationship and said, this is what I need in order to be happy and healthy in a relationship. If you're not okay with that, I'm okay with that. Because if you want me, this is what me looks like authentically. And so not being afraid of whatever the outcome and the expectation is helps to set boundaries. And it doesn't mean that I'm unwilling to bend from the boundary either. It just means that maybe I'll bend from the boundary and then communicate how I would prefer or like it to be or how I felt. And so there are times I'll bend with a customer boundary. I have a 3-year-old, so I bend on my boundaries every day with him. In fact, every day he hustles me for candy, it seems like, so I'm bending on that boundary regularly. But communicating it, I think, is the most important part.
Right, and when you're bending the boundary, you're making an active choice.
Correct.
So, you talked about therapy.
Yeah.
So how else do you pour into yourself, grow yourself?
Yeah. So I've traditionally been an avid Audible reader. I made it a goal to scale that back this year, though. And part of the problem is that I was reading like 5.5, 6 hours a day every day. And the reality is that like everybody has an opinion and most of them suck. And like one of the best examples of that is there was a couple of books. It's Good to Great. If you look at the case study of Good to Great, which was like widely regarded as like this blueprint for business success, it studied the top 25 businesses and used all these like similarities and best practices that you should adopt in order to be successful. More than 50% of them are actually out of business. So it seems to have been working out really well for them. There is no shortage of advice, most of which you shouldn't follow. And not because it's bad advice. It's because your situation has nuance to it. And we were talking about on the way here, Tyler and I, we've worked together now for what, 4 years maybe? Yeah. And I can't imagine hiring another person to do video with, because the reality is that like sometimes when you sometimes the band doesn't work very well when the band breaks up. Like you could be really talented as an individual, but way better as a band. And so that's how I feel about working with Tyler, is we don't have to communicate as much in order to have understanding and clarity. And so if I was going to read a book, somebody would give me different advice on how to have a video relationship with someone that I hire. And the reality is that probably would be wrong. And so I've cut back on the listening on the books. I don't like, if you're not someone who's spent a ton of time learning business and human behavior, then go do that. Go massively immerse yourself in human behavior, because that's everything. Business books are probably can be thrown away. Human behavior books are probably the most important. And so do that. And then for me now, it's coaching and coaching others. Okay. The best thing to better yourself is to go attempt to better other people. Because otherwise you are a charlatan. You give terrible advice that you don't actually follow. And so you have to get better.
How have you improved as a leader because of those things?
Probably should have thought about it in advance, right? I actually chose not to do that. Let's see. How have I improved as a leader? I don't know, Tyler. What do you got? What do you think?
You're better at having fierce conversations.
That's true.
About ready to go.
Yes, that's true. I think I've gotten less tolerant and more boomerish as I haven't switched to white New Balances yet, though. That's next. That's when I've really jumped the boomer shark. I have less tolerance for people who don't have grit and perseverance and want work to be happy. And by that, I mean, there are parts of being a real estate agent that are not fun and or are not enjoyable. And I'm sorry. I wish that every part of being a real estate agent was going to be enjoyable. Sometimes going on an inspection and having to talk your client back off the ledge for the 6th consecutive day is not enjoyable. And I wish it was, but it won't go away. And so the faster that we're willing to accept the fact that we all need to have emotional intelligence and grit, the happier or more at peace we will be in real estate. And so as a leader, I've gotten less tolerant, probably, or less patient with those who are unwilling to accept life to be the way that it is. And that means I'm willing to confront things faster.
Well, it comes back to what you said earlier about the victim mentality.
Yeah, it does. And, I think it's easy though, too. Our agents average 41 closings in their 2nd year in the business. So they're high producing agents. We've had a couple that are 60 and 70 closings a year agents. And, and that's their 2nd year of licensing. So they're arguably under experienced to take on that volume of real estate problems. Because I think the longer you're in the business, the more comfortable and confident you get in having 70 challenges every year, knowing that to be successful is to solve problems. And so they often can be disgruntled or can be on the edge of burnout due to the fact that they're not yet mentally conditioned for that high amount of problem solving, and the fact that the job is actually solving problems and helping people. And so, it's helping remind them that they're getting paid a lot of money to do a job that is significantly more than what probably everyone else they know makes. And to complain about the fact that people are willing to pay you an obscene amount of money to help them do something that you see as incredibly simple is quite indicative of entitlement and forgetting actually how fortunate we are to be working in an industry that is valued the way that we're valued.
I like that.
Because I'm amazed sometimes that we're able to earn the amount of living that we're able to earn.
It's unique to this industry, and it's an incredible opportunity. And I agree. It's just, not everyone sees it that way.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. I hear all of our agents for the most part are in their 20s, mid 20s, and I'll hear, except for Tom, he's old, I hear them sometimes like, oh, I don't want to talk to this client right now. I don't want to answer this agent's call. They're pissed about whatever the issue is. Or I'll hear complaints at times about agents who maybe are less emotionally grounded than others. And I just think, I will remind them that as often as possible that they're getting paid a lot of money to do something that they think is really easy and simple. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do it after just 2 years in the business, and that every agent is broken. And so there is a element of fear that every agent on the other end of the phone is projecting. And if you're avoiding the conversation, you're enabling that fear instead of trying to help them work through that. So avoiding it is only going to make it worse, and it is not at all an act of service.
I hate to throw this on you. I'm going to ask one last question, then we're going to open it up to the group.
Oh, cool.
But you just merged, so I'm sorry if you're not here.
No,
but where do you see your business 5 years from now?
Yeah, so from a business perspective, I guess this is what's tough. In the most unnarcissistic way humanly possible, I try to look at this 2 different ways. It is there's Eric Forney the person and Eric Forney the business, or Eric Forney the brand, however you look at them. And they have 2 different jobs or 2 different roles. And so me, the person, I think that 5 years from now, my role remains similar in that my job is to influence leaders and lead leaders. So part of merging companies and collaborating at a bigger level is in order to accelerate the leading the leaders portion of it. is, with 37 expansion teams, there's opportunity now for 37 CEOs to grow their business and need some of the experience and some of the assets and value that I bring to the company in order to help their agents grow and to help them grow their business. And so leading leaders is something that that I see myself doing in perpetuity. And on the business side of things, when we look at collaboration and setting a target of 600 closings in 2022, I think realistically, that's probably a 800 to 1,000 number 5 years from now, which sounds ridiculous. But changing the way we're approaching it, instead of looking at how do I go recruit an agent, and instead how do we go recruit a team? So I think about this fact that, like, whenever you go to this Starbucks, there's somebody who walks in and goes, "Hey, I'd like to get a job here," and then someone else thinks, "You know what, I'd like to manage this Starbucks," and then someone else thinks about, "Hey, I'd like to buy this place." And so how do we think about it? And I'd like to absorb that team to accelerate the growth instead of playing one-on-one.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and say thank you to Eric because this phone here is gonna
Gonna
die.
die, yeah.
So thank you. Are you gonna be able to hang out for a few minutes?
Yeah, as long as we're
All right,
yeah,
so
sure.
y'all can continue to pick his brain. Thank you to everyone on Zoom.